Here we're going to look at how to write an equation of a parabola. The question is, what is the equation of a quadratic function with vertex -2, 3 and y-intercept of -1? So the y-intercept we can also look at as the coordinate point 0, -1, and that's shown on the graph. It'll come into play in a moment. Now, a couple things before we go into the writing the equation. One of the things I want to keep in mind is that my vertex is where the axis of symmetry is. Since I have a point on the right side, that tells me I'm also going to have a point on the left side. So the vertex here should look like a maximum. So my my parabola is going to be reflected. So keep in mind that our A value should come out to be negative. We won't know exactly what it is. We can't know that just looking at the graph, but A will be negative in this case because we are going to have a reflected quadratic function. All right, so let's figure this out. You're going to start by using your vertex form, which is y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. And in a problem like this, you're going to be provided two things. They will always give you the vertex, and they'll give you a second point. So if you look at practice number 4, they give you the vertex here, and then this second point. The problem we're looking at, they give us the y-intercept, which doesn't create any extra work other than we just need to figure out that it's 0, -1. Okay. So for the y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, we want to remember that the vertex can also be looked at as hk. So that tells me that h is -2. That tells me that k is a positive 3. And then if I look at my coordinate point, 0, -1, coordinate points are usually looked at as xy. So now my x value is going to be 0, and my y value is going to be -1. So notice that we have 4 out of the 5 variables. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. We have y, x, h, and k. So that means we can now figure out what a is after we've substituted. Right, so plug these numbers in. Y is -1. I recommend you always use parentheses when substituting, and that way you avoid some common mistakes. H is -2, and that's one of the common mistakes there, right? We're subtracting a negative, so we want to make sure that we apply those those signs appropriately. And then my k value is 3. So let's just color code this. And I have my 4 variables plugged in for. All right, so from here we just start cleaning things up. The parentheses in certain cases are no longer needed. So this on the inside would become 0 plus 2. And then we'd have plus 3. Let's fix that. So now we go about solving for a. So -1 is equal to a. I can add 0 plus 2 to get 2. I then would look to do 2 squared, so -1. 2 squared is 4. Instead of a4, I'm going to write 4a. And then we can work on solving for the a value. Now, one of the things you need to be careful of is this right here. Make sure if you type that in the calculator, 2 squared is easy, but you will have problems where maybe it's like maybe you have something like -5 squared, which we know is 25. But if you type this in the calculator, you'll get the answer. But if you type this in the calculator reads this as -1 times 5 squared. It would give you a -25, so keep that in mind. We don't want that to happen. Whenever you are typing that in, squared, make sure you put parentheses around the number. We don't want to avoid simple mistakes, or we do want to avoid simple mistakes. So we're going to subtract 3, go back to solve this equation, and then finally divide by 4. So my a value would be equal to -1. Now we're not done because they are asking us for an equation of the quadratic function. Here we just have the a value. To write your final answer, you go back to your vertex form and you plug in the a, h, and k values. So we know what h is, we know what k is, And now we're going to add in our a value. Okay, so y stays as y. Plug in a, h, and k. And then just clean up any parentheses that you don't need. So x plus 2 squared plus 3. And then this would be the equation of a quadratic function. Now remember we mentioned that a should be negative, and a is negative in this case. So that does confirm that I had a reflected parabola. So we should be all right. You could always type this on a graphing calculator to check that everything matches up. And if you really wanted to, you could figure out some coordinate points by hand and just see if everything works out. But it looks like a little bit longer of a process. You have a lot of steps, but it really just comes down to substituting and some arithmetic. So if you're careful with that, take your time with these problems. The mistakes that are made are not because of the difficulty. It's usually because we're just rushing through the problem because we look at it as, it's easy to add or subtract, and then we make silly mistakes with our signs. So be careful, take your time on these, just make sure that you're getting them right.